All right. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be back with you. We looked at this a couple weeks ago. We started a series talking about signs that we see in real life and then what we see in the scriptures, in particular, the Gospel of John. Last week, we talked about the stop sign, and I'm excited to dive in with you again into another one. As we begin today, I want you to think about, if I were to ask you to rate yourself on your ability to trust, what would you give yourself as a rating? Just think about it. Let's say a 10 is, this is something you do really great at. You can really fully trust people, no problem. On the one end of the scale is like, I don't trust anyone. You know, it's just me. I'm not ever going to trust another person. Now, I want you to think about, if you had to give yourself a number, what number would you give yourself? Now, hopefully you can land on some number, and then you probably have a way of justifying the number that's in your head right now. Right? And if the number's low, I would suggest you're probably saying, well, the reason why I don't have that high number is because so-and-so. And they did this thing, or multiple people, right? You have these moments that you go, that is why I don't trust. Or if you've had great trust, it's probably also because of people. Like, yeah, that person has been good to me, and that person's been good to me. It's amazing how those experiences shape the way that we would say we trust. But trust in other people is just only one aspect of trust. There's also trust in ourselves. How much do you trust yourself? Now, that might sound a little bit weird, but have you ever second-guessed your own abilities on something where you're like, I'm not sure that I'm great at that? I'll give you a great example. Early on in life, you know, as I was a younger man, figuring out, okay, what am I good at? What am I not good at? Trying different things. And I remember one time, I want to say I was in high school, maybe late teens, early 20s, I don't exactly remember. But I remember I decided, I was driving a Toyota 4Runner, a 93 Toyota 4Runner, and I was going to replace the brakes in my own 4Runner, because that's what men do. Thank you for the courtesy laugh, JC. You know, that's what I thought. Like, if a real man can replace his brakes, I should be that guy. Like, that's what I just felt like I should do. So this is before YouTube, okay? I didn't have to, watch on a video. I had to figure out all these things. And I remember I did it. Like, functionally, the brakes were replaced in my 4Runner. But here's what I can tell you. I was paranoid to drive the vehicle from that day forward, right? Because I knew, I'm not good at this. This is not something that I'm great at. Now, I've literally physically replaced them, but did I do it right? And what if I missed something? And so I just remember I would be driving that vehicle, and it would be like, like slowing down, like, please stop. And it was like a question that I was asking my phone, like, will you stop? And that was like a line in the sand for me where I decided, no, it's worth whatever it costs to pay someone to fix my brakes. That's what it's worth in my life, because I don't have that level of trust. And now I know myself. There are things that I am good at, and replacing the brakes in my vehicle is not one of those things. Now, why are we talking about trust? Because trust requires us to move slowly, and it requires us to respond to other things. Right? I'm responding to situations in which you have treated me a certain way. I'm responding to situations in which I've learned something about myself. And I think of trust as a great way to set us up for the yield sign. Now, this is an interesting sign. If you had to describe this sign in one word, the word that I would pick would be anxiety. Right? That's what I see when I see a yield sign, anxiety. A yield sign is an interesting sign if you've driven around, and perhaps the place you see it maybe the most would be in an intersection like this. Now, this is lovingly referred to as the Roundabout. Do we have any Roundabout fans in the house today? I have found there's lots of very extreme opinions about roundabouts. We can solve our politics, just let's figure out roundabouts, right? And so there are people that love them. Anybody hate roundabouts? Yeah, equally amount of hands there, right? And so it's like the most politically jarring intersection. I don't really understand how that's possible, but people are very divided on it. And if you look in this photo, you literally can just see yielding. Like, there's so much yielding happening in that photo. All of the lanes, all of the cars, so many people looking at other people, trying to figure out which lane are you going? Are you stopping? Are you going? What speed are you going at? And if we're honest, for a lot of us, we look at that photo and you can feel the anxiety off of that photo, right? You're imagining yourself in there. If you've had to teach one of your kids how to drive, right? I've got a 16-year-old. I promise you get me into a roundabout with him, I have anxiety, okay? Because I'm looking, does he see everything? Is he yielding? Is he gonna, there's just a lot going on. Can you imagine a sign that creates more emotion for a seemingly a weird reason, right? Like you go, no, you're just yielding. You're responding to someone else, and yet this one sign can have so much of an emotional impact on us. I was also thinking about the yield sign, that if you're a parent, this is something that you also have to be regularly doing. You especially as your kids, are aging, you're constantly yielding and responding to things that they're doing, trying to figure out, can you handle this? Can you not handle this? Where are we at in different things? I'm going through a little bit of a rough patch with one of my kids at the moment. Our youngest is, learning how to make better decisions than he's making currently. And so in the mornings, we usually have a conversation. He's the first one up, and he struggles making good choices while the rest of the family is not awake. And so we trying to teach him, hey, here's how you start your day on a good note. And the other morning, we have different cameras around the house because of him. And, the other morning, I had seen some things on the cameras, and so I thought, he's been up to some stuff, And so I remember coming downstairs, and we're going to have a conversation, And it was very much a yield posture, hey, what'd you have for breakfast? Because I had seen him on a camera shoving something into the trash and then layering it. You ever seen this kid maneuver, right? I'm going to layer the trash. No trustworthy person needs to layer a trash can, okay? If you are burying things in and putting layers on top, something's bad. And so I'm he ate something he was not supposed to eat. I don't know what it was, but, So I'm yielding in the conversation. Hey, buddy, what did you eat this morning? And then he looks me dead in the eye and says, oh, I didn't have breakfast. Oh, really? You didn't have breakfast? Now we're engaging in a different level of this conversation, right? And it turns out he did have breakfast. He also had some Oreos and some Tic Tacs and a pack of Gushers, right? Just a normal breakfast, that any 9-year-old should have. And so parenting involves yielding. There's so much of our life that involves yielding. And yet what I'm also realizing is I don't love this sign. I'm just being honest with you. This sign is not the most fun sign, because what it requires out of us can be a bit draining. And we're going to find the same thing is true when we compare this sign to the story we're going to look at today with Jesus. That whatever emotions this sign creates for you, you might have similar emotions as we look at this story. Now, last week, if you were with us, I talked about one of my favorite stories, Jesus turning water into wine. That's from John chapter 2, and that happened in Cana. Now, today we're going to be in John chapter 4, and so things have happened since then, but in the story, Jesus is back to Cana. So he's gone back to where we were last week. Things have happened in between, but he's returned back. Now, last week, the miracle was all about abundance. And I would encourage you can go find that message online if you missed it. All about just an absurd way that Jesus solves the problem way beyond what was necessary or how you and I could solve it. So that was about abundance. Today, we're going to see the miracle is all about urgency, which is appropriate when you're talking about a yield sign. So we're going to look at John chapter 4. We're going to begin reading in verse 46. I'll take the anxiety photo away for you guys so you can move on with me, okay? John chapter 4, verse 46. As he traveled through Galilee, he came to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. There was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son, who was about to die. And Jesus asked, "Will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders?" The official pleaded, "Lord, please come now before my little boy dies." And then Jesus told him, "Go back home, your son will live. And the man believed what Jesus said and started home. So we have Jesus with a government official who has traveled from another town. Now, this government official, most scholars believe, probably worked for a guy named Herod Antipas. Now, if you've read the Gospels before, that name might sound familiar. You're going, Herod Antipas, what do I know him from? Herod Antipas was the guy who is going to cause the beheading of John the Baptist. So if you've ever heard that story, that is Herod Antipas is the one that decides, off with his head. Literally, he's the reason John the Baptist will be murdered. Herod Antipas is also involved in Jesus' execution. So what we would have to acknowledge from any of the Jesus group at this point, they weren't the established church yet, but those following Jesus, they would not have liked Herod Antipas. In fact, I would go so far as to say they would have considered him an enemy, that he is opposed to all of the things that we're about. This is an enemy. So here you have what many scholars believe is a government official who works for that guy coming to Jesus. Now you can imagine the disciples are like, what's Jesus going to say to this guy? How is he going to turn this guy away? And Jesus shows them compassion. Now here's what I would make of that. You go, well, what do we conclude from that? See, Jesus never drew lines of who was worthy of compassion. That's what we do. We have all sorts of reasons. Well, this person deserves it, this person doesn't. And we could go and create all kinds of criteria that we have developed for why we would include certain people and not include other people. But what I want you to see is there were no others in Jesus' story. Jesus did not other people, right? So even someone who the disciples would have said, that's like the bad guy, don't do that. He's welcoming him in, not condoning what he's doing, because Jesus is working against Herod, but he's still going to show him compassion, which is a reminder for us. Anyone that you ever view as an enemy is never outside of your compassion. Never outside of humanity offer to one another. And if we would get back to that lesson alone, many of the problems we face in our world would be better. Now, we might wonder in this story why Jesus doesn't do what this guy is asking. Did you catch that? Now, you might go, well, Jesus said his son's going to be well, so that's great. But Jesus essentially is saying yes to that and no to what he's actually asking him. Because what this guy asks him is, will you go with me? Will you come back home with me? And so that you can ensure that my son will be healed. And Jesus is like, no, I'm not going with you. Now you may wonder, that seems really harsh. Why wouldn't Jesus just pop over there? Because the text says nearby Capernaum, which is very misleading, and I'll show you why. I want to show you on a map what it would look like to travel from Capernaum to Cana. Now, Capernaum is at the top of the water there, and then you go down all the way, and that's where Cana is. Now, if you were to walk this is about, depending on your route, about an 8-hour walk. Okay, and we know from a few details in the story that the man walked. So this is about an 8-hour walk. What you don't realize off this image is that where he went from Capernaum to Cana is uphill. It's 20 miles uphill. Sounds like something your grandparents told you. I had to walk to school uphill in the snow, right? It's like that idea, like 20 miles uphill. That is what this guy had to do just to get to Jesus. So then when he says to Jesus, hey, will you come to Capernaum with me? That's not just a, hey, real quick, can you pop over with me? That would be, can you commit a journey to this to come back and be with my son? But why would he ask Jesus that? Because that's the only way he can ensure his son's going to be saved. Like you would do the same thing, right? Hey, Jesus, I believe that you can heal him. Will you come and do it so I can see you heal my son? Now, you don't make this kind of a walk just for fun. This isn't a light afternoon stroll. This isn't like, hey, I'm just going to get some exercise. This is a walk of desperation. This is, I heard there's someone within walking distance to me. If I commit a couple days to it, I can be there and back. I'm going to go find this man. This is someone who is desperate for a solution. And I would also say this is a beautiful picture of faith. Not faith in certainty, not faith in I can tell you exactly how this is going to play out, but faith in the person of Jesus. If I can just get to Jesus, and I can just get Jesus to come to my son, then this can be resolved. Then my son could live. And so he comes to Jesus with this one request. Jesus doesn't do it. But Jesus says instead, your son will live. What Jesus is asking him to do, which is not, it's implied in the text, it's not really explained out. He's basically saying, you're going to have to take me at my word. You're going to have to trust me that your son is going to live because I'm not walking back with you. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to do this. Now, this is the most relatable part of the story because he essentially gets an answer, but it's not an answer the way he asked it, right? This is him yielding to Jesus. I'm going to have to go off of what Jesus is saying, which is not exactly what I want, and I'm going to have to respond accordingly. Now notice, this man's not doing nothing. He's decided I'm going to walk back home, but he's also not guaranteed anything. He doesn't know for sure if what Jesus said is going to come true. He has to trust Jesus as he begins his journey back home. And we know that feeling, right? When you pray for something and then you wait. And sometimes you wait and you wait and you wait. And sometimes you wait so long you begin to wonder, right? Like, is this going to get answered? Am I going to get a response? I don't feel anything. I don't see anything. I don't sense anything. I'm just waiting, yielding. Jesus, what are you up to? And then we're left to walk home, wondering what we're going to find. Wondering, hey, at the end of this journey, at the end of this story, what will be the outcome? And then we get to verse 51. I skipped. Oh, yeah, that's the yield sign. There we go. Okay. While the man was on his way, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. He asked them when the boy had begun to get better, and they replied, yesterday afternoon at 1:00, his fever suddenly disappeared. Then the father realized that this was the very time Jesus had told him, your son will live. And he and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was the second miraculous sign Jesus did in Galilee after coming from Judea. This man finds out the exact moment when Jesus said, your son will live. That is when the miracle happened. He just didn't know it. Now, there are other translations that try to emphasize the timing of this. David Bentley Hart translates verse 50 like this. Jesus says to him, go, your son is alive, right? Rather than saying your son will live, your son is alive. He is good. He is healed right now. The man had faith in the words Jesus spoke to him and departed. Isn't that how faith often works? The miracle has already happened. He just hadn't seen the results yet. You ever had a moment like that? Where the miracle had already happened, had already taken place. You were just unaware of it. You hadn't realized it yet. The news hadn't got to you. And then you find out later, oh, Jesus was up to something. I just wasn't in the know. See, the fact that the servant told him, your son was healed yesterday, implies that not only did he have to walk, a day's journey to get there, a day's journey back, he had to wait overnight. Your son was healed yesterday, but you're showing up today. Which means that this man had to yield to Jesus, not just on an 8-hour journey, but that 8-hour journey didn't take him all the way back home. He had to stop, and he had to wait overnight. Can you imagine what it felt like to go to sleep that night, wondering, what am I going to find tomorrow? Will my son be alive? Will Jesus be right? Or will all of this have been in vain? Will all of this have been just a dismissed hope, and I'm going to realize my son's gone? Maybe he'll never see his son again. Can you imagine what he experienced that night? But perhaps you know what that feels like. Perhaps right now you're in a season of waiting overnight on Jesus. And you're like, yeah, that's how I feel. I am yielding to Jesus. I am waiting, and I'm not sure what Jesus is going to do. I'm not sure what I'm going to find at the end of this story. It reminds me a little bit of a Chinese proverb, and you perhaps have heard this proverb. I think about it. It says this: a farmer and his son had a beloved stallion who helped the family earn a living. One day the horse ran away, and their neighbors exclaimed, "Your horse ran away? What terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned home, leading a few wild mares back to the farm as well. The neighbors shouted out, "Your horse has returned," and brought several horses home with him. What great luck. The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." Later that week, the farmer's son was trying to break one of the mares, and she threw him to the ground, breaking his leg. The villagers cried, "Your son broke his leg. What terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few weeks later, soldiers from the National Army marched through town, recruiting all of the able-bodied boys for the army. They did not take the farmer's son, still recovering from his injury. And friends shouted, "Your boy is spared. What tremendous luck." To which the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." See, that story is profound when you take it in its entirety. When you look at all of these events and you go, yeah, that is how life works. I thought that was going to be horrible and it turned out this way. And I thought that was going to be good and it turned out this way. Like in its entirety, you go, that's really, it is a profound proverb. But the problem is we don't live that story in its entirety. We live it one event at a time, right? You have the really good day and you go, wow, what does this mean? Followed by the really bad day. What does this mean? And then you go back and forth. And so we are left to make sense of Jesus one moment at a time, which requires a whole lot of this. A whole lot of yielding and waiting and wondering and sometimes waiting overnight on long journeys and going, Jesus, are you going to do what I asked you to do or not? See, we can relate with this story. I have found that faith often looks like walking home with questions. That's what faith often looks like. It's what it feels like. Like this man walking home, waiting overnight, having a whole bunch of questions and no answers at that point. Just a sense of trust and faith in Jesus. Will he show up? Will I take Jesus at his word even when we are walking in the dark? Now, there's also an irony of this story, and especially as we talk about it, the story is a sign for people, because notice who didn't get the sign to benefit from. This father. See, the father has to go walk home without any sign that Jesus is who he says he is. The story ends, and then we find out, oh, this whole thing was a sign for everybody else. How great. But the irony is the dad didn't get the sign. The dad was part of the story. And so he had to meet Jesus in the moment without the sign. We get the benefit of learning from it. Brian McLaren has said it like this: true faith doesn't wait for certainty, it acts in trust. Right? If we wait for certainty, that's not yielding. That's demanding. Like, hey, I'm not gonna do anything till I get exactly what I want. No, yielding requires moving forward without certainty, moving forward in trust. So as we look at the faith step for this sign, the challenge for you and I is to let go of control. To let go of our need to have that certainty, to have all of the answers, and instead choose to believe. Choose to move forward in trust, even when we're not sure what will happen. Yielding is all about a response to someone else, and following Jesus requires a lot of yielding to him. All right, Jesus, not sure what you're going to do here. Not sure how this one's going to play out, but we'll see where you're going to take it. And so I want to close with this question. What situation in your life feels unresolved or uncertain. As you think about your life right now, where might you have this kind of an encounter with Jesus? Where you go, yeah, I'm not sure about this thing. I'm feeling a bit of anxiety here. Jesus, what are you up to? What are you doing? Maybe like this father, you've been praying for healing. For you, for someone around you. And you are praying and hoping and trusting that Jesus shows up in some way. And you're just waiting. And you're yielding to that. Maybe there's a question that you have that you don't have an answer for this question. But you keep asking, you keep searching, you keep digging. You're going, Jesus, are you going to give me an answer to this? Are you going to show up and respond to this? Or maybe you have some unresolved worry or fear. There's lots of reasons for that right now. And you're going, God, what's going on? How's that going to play out? What's going to happen here? And rather than getting the answers you want, you get this sign, an invitation to yield to Jesus and still make the walk home. Sometimes the miracle happens when we're walking home, when we're yielding without the knowledge of what we're looking for. P. Enns said it like this: faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the presence of trust. If we could remove the absence of doubt, there would be no need to yield. We would have exactly what we need. But trust requires we say, all right, Jesus, I will keep responding to you. I will keep my eyes on you, and I will adjust accordingly as I keep moving. Let's pray together. Jesus, as we learn from this story, I pray that you would give us the courage to follow in this man's footsteps. That he was physically, literally walking home, not knowing the answer to his question. And asking you to come with him and getting told no, he had to instead choose faith. He had to instead rely on trust. And that's a lot of yielding to you. And yet we can relate with that because we know what that feels like, to not have the answers, to not have the certainty, and to wonder whether or not you're going to answer our prayer and how you're going to answer our prayer. So today I pray that we can learn from this sign, learn about who you are, the kind of God that you are, even as we learn about the nature of the journey of following you. So God, would you give us the courage, the patience, the willingness to keep walking in trust, even when we don't have the certainty. We pray in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen.